our ASCO Social Checkup webinar. I'm Chloe Particus. I'm the Social Media Director at Ogilvy Health World.
I'm Rick Evans. I'm a Senior Digital Strategist at Ogilvy Health World.
I'm Becky Camden. I'm the Director of Social Media, also at Ogilvy Health World. And I'm Jackie Kuyver, the CEO of Convosphere.
Just so that we can check the chat function, we wanted to know from you guys whether you attended ASCO, whether you followed ASCO online, or whether you're just here for the webinar to learn a bit more about ASCO and how everyone behaves around the Congress. So if you could just write in the chat panel, that would be awesome. So a quick overview of Ogilvy Health World. We work with pharma and healthcare and wellness companies all around the globe on marketing, communications, PR, and social media. So we've been working with a lot of the companies that we'll chat about today for a really long time in the social media space, and we do a lot of activities around Congress, all the key congresses every year.
A little bit more about Convosphere. We're a social listening services agency, and we work directly with life sciences agencies and their pharma clients to do social listening in 45 languages across the globe. We have deep insight and expertise in pharma and life sciences, and often do Congress listening for our clients.
So last month, as many of you know, at the start of June, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, so ASCO, held the world's most influential cancer conference in Chicago, and it's held in Chicago every year. So it's the annual ASCO meeting. Together we've worked, so Ogilvy Health World and Convosphere, we've partnered to bring you the top social media insights from this Congress. And over the next hour, we will give you an overview of the most engaging social media content, which pharma companies will widely discuss, the key topics of discussion at the Congress and online around the Congress, and clinical trials mentioned on social media. So we really hope that all of you learn some useful insights that you can take away today that you can use when planning social media content and activities at Congress. So please, we'll answer questions at the end, but also if you have any questions throughout, please just send us a note on the chat.
So getting started, we collected the ASCO conversations that were happening on Twitter. What we did is that we have done, like we've done at previous ASCOs, where we take all of the online conversations that are happening the days of the Congress, and we create the data set by using specific hashtag-based keyword terms that are specific to the Congress. So in this case, it's ASCO, ASCO 2018, and ASCO 18. So we captured this as a data set to look at what was said by the different stakeholders, whether they were pharma companies or physicians, over the course of the Congress. Not surprisingly, the highest peak in conversations was on June 3rd, when most tweets mentioned ASCO. The plenary session was held this day, and this includes abstract presentations of the top practice-changing science with commentary from expert discussants. As we go further through this webinar, we'll be showing you not just the details of what was discussed, but by whom, as we segment this into the different stakeholder groups.
Okay, so this slide shows the difference in Twitter coverage year on year around ASCO. So the number of people who attended ASCO in 2017 was 39,400. And whilst we don't have the final figures for 2018, it looks like it was fairly similar. We do know that there were many articles, including one on Medscape, about the fact that many HCPs are now not attending these big congresses in person. That's due to a multitude of factors such as cost, ecological concerns around travel, as well as busyness and availability, etc. The Congress is becoming increasingly virtual, and the organisers are looking to offer HCPs at home or in clinic as close as possible in experience to being there in person. Indeed, we know that many of the leading influencers on social media at medical congresses are not actually present, but have the clout and reputation to drive the conversation online. We also know that pharma companies have been criticised for putting so much paid media behind Congress posts and dominating the conversation. This has been particularly negatively received by the HCP audience. In fact, the audience the pharma companies are trying to reach most strongly. Many pharma companies have held back more this year, and this might explain the slight drop-off in conversation that you can see. We'll discuss that in more detail a bit later in the presentation. One of the conversations we always have at Ogilvy with our clients is around how many HCPs are actually using social media. It's probably fair to say that they're generally very busy people and not all of them have the time or perhaps the inclination to use social media for professional purposes. But this is changing, and we know that whilst not all HCPs are actively posting on social media, tweeting all the time, many more are actually following news sources and social media influencers online. And at no time is this more apparent than during the big social media congresses such as ASCO. Indeed, it's really interesting to see that for the past few years, 40% of all tweets about the congresses were actually by HCPs, and that's increased quite dramatically, as you can see, from 2015. It could be that the plateau in the last 2 years suggests that it's probably reached its peak. So it'll be really interesting to see if the trend continues at the same level next year, especially now we know that not all of the HCPs are actually attending the Congress, so the conversation is more online than offline at the event itself. This slide here shows a breakdown between all of the different stakeholder groups that we're talking. Of course, we've just been talking about HCPs, who make up the largest segment here, 40% of all discussions. However, they're not the only people talking. Healthcare and mainstream media predictably make up a significant percentage of the people talking about ASCO. We've got experts here. When we talk about experts, we're talking about academics rather than HCPs in clinical practice. And we have organizations there, which covers NGOs and government health organizations, groups like that. Pharma companies had quite a small share this year. They were probably much bigger last year, quite possibly down to some of the criticisms that we've seen in the press of the way that they were hogging the airwaves for paid promotion, according to some of the healthcare professional audiences. So we've seen them scale back the amount of activity that they put on this year. We've also got communities in there, so that's looking at patient communities and forums, for example. And we've got a segment there we've called Others, which includes posts that we were unable to categorize by group.
When we take a look at all the conversations that were happening, we can start to identify the top authors and mentions. So that's the authors who either created content and shared it at ASCO or were mentioned in other people's posts. Unsurprisingly, many of these were ASCO itself and other cancer organizations and cancer centers. For example, the ASCO account had the greatest number of tweets and mentions at 8,300. And then we have a number of different cancer organizations such as Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson, and Dana-Farber, as well as different individuals such as the ASCO presidents themselves. We also took a look at the key trials mentioned during the ASCO annual meeting, and we took a look at them to understand what was being spoken about and what different sessions these covered and the different health areas that they were on. So the Taylor-X study around breast cancer generated the most conversation on Twitter within the data set. And then as you can see, renal cell carcinoma study of the Carmena study was the second most discussed. Many of these were covered in sessions at the ASCO meeting. As the overall data set was a collection of ASCO, ASCO 2018 and ASCO 18, you can see that the bulk of the data set was comprised by the hashtag ASCO 18. They used different years to separate this data from previous annual meetings, and this is commonly added to most of the posts that happen around the ASCO conference. The disease awareness posts or hashtags used, like lung cancer and immunotherapy, correlate to the different sessions that were presented at the annual meeting. Looking at the 2018 ASCO abstracts themselves, where there were over 6,000 in total, we looked at the abstracts as well as looking at the data set to identify the most discussed therapeutic areas. So as you can see, the ASCO abstracts actually correlate to the volume of the topics discussed. For example, breast cancer, which contributed 39% of the discussion, had 1,187 abstracts. Lung cancer with 34% represented 1,069. So the volume of conversation was to measure it to the actual content shared at ASCO. When we look at the conversation specifically by stakeholder groups, if we look at what HCPs were discussing, we see that the majority, 48%, was disease awareness. They were sharing original posts and sharing, resharing posts around the awareness topic. And that could be discussion around knowing or educating oneself or others around a topic that was shared at ASCO and spreading awareness through their posts. The next was clinical trials. So the posts on clinical trial results or in general around a clinical trial that was presented at ASCO or discussed. Next was presentations and the sessions themselves, which generated a good amount of conversation at 28%, where the HCPs mentioned specific sessions and presentations and directed others to attend them. Disease area or tumor types mentioned specific cancer types. The treatments talked about the treatment options for those cancer types, and the technology were posts on any tech by HCPs, such as HCPs found Twitter and Sync and iPlanner easier to navigate the annual meeting.
Next, we looked at the top engaging content from across the Congress. So there's 4 posts that really stood out. The first one was from Amgen. So the one out of the top 4 that was actually from a pharma company. And this one was more around National Cancer Survivors Day, and there was a lot of discussion and lots of engagement with cancer survivors. So this was lots of patient discussion. The second post was from the National Cancer Institute, and it was a pinned tweet, and it talks specifically about CAR T-cell therapy, and the image shows the treatment process in detail. The third was from an HCP, and it was breaking news with trial results for kidney cancer. And there wasn't a link in there, but it looks like the slide was taken directly from a Congress presentation. And this really has appeal for oncologists who can't attend the Congress or session, which is why we think it performed so well, because it gave them something when they couldn't physically be there. And the last post was directly from the ASCO channel, and it talked about study results, and it linked to the press release. And I think something to note here is this is when you look at the actual post and the images and the one from Amgen, and that it's actually text only, it shows that people online won't. Normally when we're creating content, we always want it to look really beautiful and sleek, but I think with the Congress, as a lot of the top content comes from the news that's actually happening, all of this is very data heavy. It's not the most beautiful, but it's actually the information in there that's the gold that's performed really well. And we just want to remind everyone that if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat panel.
So this slide shows the top pharma companies mentioned at the Congress. We should probably be clear when we're presenting this slide that when we have MSD and Merck on here, they're actually the same company. So that's the company that is referred to as MSD outside the US and is referred to as Merck inside the US. We've just separated those out there just to be clear because we were tracking it based on mentions of the specific company and their handle, but it doesn't reflect, that data set doesn't reflect the other company, the German Merck, just to avoid any confusion there. But what this shows is the total mentions of the pharma companies, at mentions, hashtag mentions, and general mentions of the brand name at the Congress.
So in looking at the ways that the different pharma companies engaged around the Congress, we took a look at how they engaged before Congress and then during Congress on ASCO specific content. So to do this, we developed a Convo Score. So we calculated this on 4 parameters. So for overall Twitter engagement before the Congress, we look at the total number of tweets and retweets by the pharma company handles and their total number of followers. Then during ASCO specifically, we look at their total number of posts by the pharma companies on ASCO 2018 and we look at the total engagement around ASCO. So this includes @mentions and retweets of the pharma company handles. And then what we do is we rank these comparatively on 1 to 5, with the 1 being the least performing and 5 being the highest performer. And then all of the scores are added up and extrapolated out from 20 to 100. So that's how we get to the Congo Score, which is a relative score between the different pharma companies engaging at the specific congress. So you'll see here, Roche has a pharma score of 75 and performed very well in terms of its engagement at ASCO. More specifically, we can take a deeper look at how Roche performed. So its performance was based on the Twitter handle that contributed to their ASCO 2018 conference post. This included Roche and Roche_DE. So among all the pharma companies considered for the analysis, they had the highest combo score, and this was due to Roche having a good number of followers and total tweets and retweets from its handles during ASCO. The Roche authored the highest number of posts around the conference. Out of the pharma companies considered, it had an average engagement on its posts. The engagement was spread across the post and not concentrated around the specific post. But you can see here the number of total followers they have, the total tweets, and the type of content that they were sharing around ASCO. We do have data and analysis on all of the pharma companies who engaged at ASCO, and we can make that available for a deeper dive discussion. But for the purposes of this webinar, we wanted to give you a highlight of their engagement.
Okay, so now that we've presented the data to you, we really want to sort of, give you our recommendations and a summary on what we've actually learned and what we can take away from this. So previously, as Rick mentioned, the volume of Twitter conversation at ASCO has really significantly increased over the last 3 years since we ran this data set. But since 2017, it's reduced slightly, and we wonder whether that's actually now plateaued. So as we mentioned, it'll be really interesting to see what will happen next year. Also, we've learned that HCPs had the highest share of voice and conversation around ASCO on social media, and actually pharma only had 5% of that conversation share. So it could be that now pharma is actually listening up and making a difference around how they're using social at Congress. As Chloe was talking about, the most engaged content was actually that which contained newsworthy information and really detailed images, which would go against what the social media guidelines actually state in terms of the recommendations for imagery. And finally, we saw that although Amgen was the most mentioned pharma company on social media, Roche was actually the top company in terms of engagement. And we really saw that that was because they had really simple tweets, they informed people about their sessions, and they used their global head of oncology to really give her perspective on the cancer treatment and linking to media releases as well. So what should pharma companies do at Congress, and should they even be there? Well, the first area really to focus on is to continue to control that content pollution at Congress. So as we mentioned in recent years during ASCO meetings, there's really been a growing concern raised by the attendees around conversations really being overshadowed with content from the pharma companies. And actually this year, AstraZeneca pledged to change their social media strategy, and they laid that out in 5 points for its new social tactics. And you may have seen that, but one of those was around promising not to use paid social and actually to listen more. And as I mentioned just now, 5% of those conversations were from pharma companies themselves. And even on this slide, you can see we found a tweet from an influencer, a doctor who attended the Congress. And that actually reveals that 78% of people who took that poll really thought that pharma was this year pushing out less content and actually listening to conversations. So with all of that in mind, we really think it's actually important that pharma considers whether it's valuable to be part of that conversation, and really ensure that every piece of content that you put out has a rationale behind it. If you don't have news, then why are you creating content? And if so, then maybe it might be useful for you to just listen to the conversations that are happening and understand how you can fill those gaps, which would give you an opportunity to create more reactive content itself and be part of the conversation that way. And another sort of food for thought is actually, if you do have big data at Congress, then the data will almost speak for itself, and your attendees or the attendees at the Congress will promote it on social media. So really think about why you're producing content and how you're putting it out there to help control that content pollution. The second way that pharma should behave with their planning around content and social media for Congress is really to think about the content types and formats that the audience actually wants and is interested in. So guidance from the social platforms themselves say that in-stream images should really be simple and very uniform, but it's really clear from our analysis and from the 2 tweets that we pulled out on the screen there that the best performing content actually had a lot of information in it. So what content should pharma companies and what format should you be pushing out? Well, it's really, I think the key thing is to think about who you're targeting. So if you're targeting an HCP, you need to really understand, you know, what makes them tick and what they're interested in, and you need to think about the types of images that will resonate with them. And you may want to, you know, help your audience to share your data by really thinking about the design of your slides and the way that they're getting that information so that it's easy for them to share on social media. And also not just pushing out one image and thinking that that's what's best, but actually testing a couple of options and seeing what does work. So you've got a few variations and you can see what gets the best response. And then finally, we feel that it's really important to stay on top of those latest trends and develops in social media. So I'm sure you've seen in the news recently that transparency is really at the top of the social platforms agenda, and they're becoming much more transparent following the misuses of data. So for example, on the 28th of June, so last month, Facebook and Twitter both launched their transparency tools for advertising, which means that anyone is now able to see what ads are running on the pharma companies or anybody's Facebook or Twitter page. And this means that far more information is accessible to all. So we should really use that information to understand how posts are shared at on social media at congresses. We also need to think about the new formats that are around. So one example we've put out here is Instagram TV, which was recently launched, and this is you may have seen it on your Instagram page and tested it yourself, but it's a new app which allows full screen hour-long videos rather than the shorter videos that you could normally have posted on your page. And then we know that a lot of pharma companies are working with influencers, and that's a really nice way of being able to push out your content with and making sure that it's reliable and useful for your audiences. However, social media users, and myself included in this, I'm sure you feel the same, we're becoming much more savvy to how pharma and other companies are using influencers, and actually less tolerant to them. So we've seen companies just throwing money at them, and actually that undermines not just the influencer themselves, but the authenticity of the content as well. So this could actually threaten what you're doing and the opportunity for everybody. So it's really important that you embrace those influencers and think about why you're using them. And so we need to have new methods and new ways of doing that.
So now on to questions. We've had a few come through already. Jackie, these are all for you currently. And the first one was from Judith. Do you group Genentech with Roche, or is this separate?
So we had them separate because each of the pharma companies were grouped based on their individual user profiles on Twitter.
The next question is from Martha. Were the disease awareness posts also hashtagged with hashtag ASCO?
Yes. So the data set was comprised of hashtag ASCO, hashtag ASCO18, and hashtag ASCO2018. So that was the entire data set, and it was only within there that we then began to identify and segment the topics of discussion, such as disease awareness.
And one from Tom, was this solely Twitter, and could Instagram and LinkedIn also be combined?
So we often listen at different therapeutic area congresses. So this being an oncology one and ASCO, it has a high Twitter prevalence. We've looked at the other online channels such as Instagram and Facebook. There is much less conversation, and it often happens after the event as it's a recap or a deeper share. The conference sessions often have hashtags associated with them, and people orient their activities and their engagement with other attendees around the use of Twitter and these hashtags.
And now a question for you, Becky. So the recommendation for listening and sending reactive posts, this is from Rich. Have you seen this work given pharma's need for medical, legal, regulatory review of brand communications and the constraints that come along with that from regulatory bodies?
Yeah, sure. So we've actually done quite a lot of this type of work. And one example I can think of off the top of my head is for World Cancer Day, where we worked with a company to listen to conversations before and during World Cancer Day and create that reactive content. So I think the key things that you need to bear in mind is that preparation is really vital. So you can prepare some of the content beforehand or have sort of templates that you can use. But you also need to have the key people in the room. So on World Cancer Day in our room, we had, from the client side, we had the medical, the legal teams, we had the social media team as well. And then from our side, we had our social experts and also the creative team too. So we could write the content with the editor. Actually before that, we were listening to the conversations. We found the relevant information. We then drafted the tweet or the Facebook post. We created an image. One of our creative team did that. And then we put that through review in the room on the day. And then we were able to post it a bit later. So yeah, we've done that before, but we can also send you more information on that. If you're interested, just let us know.
So next we've got a question from Rich. With the dominance of a few large pharma companies in terms of volume of posts, do you have any recommendations for smaller companies to cut through the noise? So definitely this is a great question. On social these days, volume doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have any impact. So for a lot of companies, having a good promotion strategy is really important. Of course, there's been, a lot of discussion over the years, and with AstraZeneca last year saying they wouldn't do any paid promotion because they wanted the authentic conversation from the HCPs in the space to really shine. But I think, if you are a small pharma company and you do have news or you do have something that's actually, you think deserves to be part of the conversation and isn't just, posting and promoting content for the sake of it. Definitely, having a good paid promotion strategy where you would, be targeting the ASCO hashtag is really important, but just, take it with a grain of salt. Another question from Chelsea, thank you. How important is publishing content after the event too? What sort of things should be considered during this time? Rick?
Well, I think with what we've been saying as well about how some of the pharma companies have been criticised for putting lots of paid promotion behind their posts or perhaps posting too commercially throughout the event, actually after the event is where they can add the most value. And this is where listening comes down to it. So trying to find out what the key topics people are talking about, what the main discussion points are, where there are gaps in knowledge or unmet needs. Also doing wrap-ups of the content that's been presented, the data that's been presented, and actually providing answers to that content after the event when the conversations died down.
A great answer, thanks, Rick. And another question we have is, do you have any plans to look at other congresses outside the cancer space? So yes, we definitely, are keen to look at
other therapy areas, definitely. And I think, you know, if you guys have any particular requests, we're very much open to it. Jackie, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so we regularly listen in and have extensive data sets of both current and previous congresses. So we're able to track how the conversation has changed, both within the same year across the, in the same therapeutic area across congresses, and then also year over year on the same Congress, the annual Congress. So I think you might also want to think about what your objectives are for the listening. In this case, we're sharing some good high-level information, but if you come to listening to Congress with a specific objective in mind, such as understanding HCP reaction to a study or trial that you're releasing, or trying to understand your return on investment in what you've put in, both as an attending company or maybe in your sponsorship, or trying to understand the unmet needs of HCPs, or even as Rick and Chloe have mentioned, understanding influencers, who's influencing the conversation within the Congress itself or the overall therapeutic area. I think having these objectives when you do listen into these congresses is very beneficial.
Another question that we've had come through, what would you recommend for a company who has data at a congress? How should they use social media?
So I think this goes back to what we were saying around really, you know, thinking about what the data is, and actually the fact that if it's big data, then it will almost speak for itself. But what we have seen is that the top engaging posts, so those ones from Roche who perform really well through the Convo Score that we saw, they linked to the media release, and they also had their head of oncology do some really nice videos, videos around the data itself, unbranded of course, but yeah, those are just a couple of ideas.
So I'm just looking through other questions.
Yep.
Oh, can Convosphere gauge sentiment like other platforms? Jackie?
Yes. So we can absolutely do automated sentiment, but where we actually bring additional value is going deeper. So taking it beyond the negative or positive. In some cases, we use Plutchek's wheel of behavior, which looks at things like frustration, anger, joy to identify drivers or barriers, or looking at within those negative and positive or the Plutchek's wheel, what are the specific areas or topics that are driving the negativity so that you can understand what to do about that, why it's happening, and what can be done differently.
Cool. Any other questions to send through at all? Please just write in the chat. All right, so I think that's covered all of our questions. Thank you, everyone. We will be putting the webinar and the slides up online on the Ogilvy Common Health SlideShare page. And once we've done that, we'll send a note out to everyone that's attended today, so that if you want to revisit anything or you want to, you know, look back on any of the slides and you've got any extra questions, please have a look and just send questions through to us. Our emails are on the last page. So thank you, everyone.